All right, guys and gals, I am back for part two of the SuBARU B9 TRIBECA engine removal replacement. This is the installation process. This is the new to me motor that we got from a junkyard that was guaranteed good. So I got everything swapped out on it, and we're gonna set it back in here. The first video showed us removing it, so if you need information on that, go back to our first video and check that out. So before we install the engine, before we drop it down in here and start bolting it back up, there's a couple things you want to do. First, in the car, if you want to clean anything up, you can. I'm gonna wipe some of that up here in a second. That was from when I was seating the torque converter, and that brings me to my point. You want to make sure this torque converter is fully seated. You can kind of feel back in here. It's only going to go so far in, then it's going to stop. So you want to make sure it's seated. I think the clearance is supposed to be like less than 1/8 of an inch right here. So if you want to break out the measuring tape or whatever and measure that, you can, but just make sure it seats in there. It's all the way seated because you don't want any issues there. And then, like I said, this is the engine we got from the junkyard. They chopped all the wiring harnesses up, so I had to take the wiring harness off the old engine and a bunch of the sensors. I ended up changing all these cam synchronizers and the crank sensor because some of the connectors didn't fit for some reason. They looked exactly the same, but they didn't plug in, so I just used all the old sensors because we know they're good too. I changed these knock sensors too, and I went ahead and changed all the rubber hoses out. You want to make sure and do that because, if you get an engine from the junkyard, there's no telling how long it's been sitting. So it could be, they could be rotted out and falling apart, and you don't want to get all this put back together to find out this hose is leaking, because then you have to pull the intake back off. So I did all that. I got all the wiring harnesses swapped out. I also changed the valve cover gaskets on this and the spark plugs, because obviously when you're looking at this engine in the car, it's going to be sitting sideways, and these valve cover gaskets are really hard to change when the engine's sitting in there. So it was a lot easier doing it here. They were slightly leaking, and I just went ahead and changed the gasket, so I ain't got to worry about it. And I did the spark plugs like I said, and it's pretty simple to do the valve cover gaskets. You just take all the bolts out, clean it up real good, and just tighten it back, put new gaskets on it, tighten it back. You want to put silicone in some of the corners that look like they might leak, and tighten it up, and that's pretty simple. So, and I also used the used motor came with a compressor and an alternator, but I put the original compressor back on because I know it works, and I'm going to use the original alternator and power steering pump because I just don't know the condition of the other ones. So we're just going to go back with what we know works. So now that I got everything swapped over in here, I'm going to get this camera set up, and we will begin dropping this motor in here. I can't think of anything else to say here. So yeah, let me get this camera set up and I'll be right back. So guys, one more quick tip. If you're getting an engine from the junkyard, it's a good idea to take one of your transmission bolts, because they're all the same size, and run them through all these holes and make sure that the threads aren't messed up, because when you get stuff from a junkyard, they're just ripping and stripping stuff out of there, so they really don't care if they strip stuff or break stuff. So it's a good idea to check these before you start setting everything back down in here. And if you need to fix them, you can run a tap through them or rethread them, or however you got to do it. So just wanted to throw that in there too. All right, we're ready to set this thing in here. Let me get this rolled around. Let's start jacking it up. And if you watch the first video, you're going to want to jack I put a jack under the transmission. Obviously you can't see it, but there's a jack handle. You want to get the transmission jacked up. You'll probably have to adjust it a little bit, but if you leave it sitting down, you'll never get it lined up. So you want to get the transmission up in the air just a little bit. And you just want to ease it down in there. You don't want to set it down in there real fast because that's how you damage stuff. So you just want to just slightly crack this thing open so you can kind of guide it in here. And that way it doesn't mess anything up. Pull this thing over here. And like I also said in the first video, I've never done one of these before, so this is also my first time installing it. So you'll probably have to bear with me with that as well. So, but installing an engine and transmission, pretty much the same deal and everything. Theories are different, but for the most part, everything's the same. So the hardest part's probably going to be to get these bottom studs in. So we're going to have to set this thing all the way down. I know it looks kind of weird right now, but just bear with me. Because you're going to want to pick up on the front of this. Seeing as I used the seat belt that came from the junkyard, I don't have any hook to grab to, so I'm going to try to just twist it and see if that helps. I'm just going to jack it up a little bit to get it to go in. Got the studs all the way in the bottom. There's that. Now we're going to get a couple bolts started by hand. Don't go hammering home on these bad boys just yet. Make sure they're all the way in. Then we'll get our electric ratchet and we'll get these snug just to make sure it pulls the transmission all the way up. And then we'll put the rest of them in. Just make sure we look flush at the bottom. Get my flashlight out of here. And I think we are good. Let me check this other side. We are completely flush now. Now we're going to put the rest of the bolts that we can reach on top in. One right here. Drop my socket. Alright, got all them bolts torqued out. So the next thing we're going to do is put the torque converter bolt on. Sorry about that last section, guys. The sound cut out on me for some reason. But all I was doing, you might have heard at first, putting the transmission bolts in. I got it all lined up. And I got the upper transmission bolts in, and I think maybe one of the lower ones too. But at any rate, I got about 4 or 5 in the top and got the transmission flush, and I also torqued them to 37 foot-pounds. That's what the all data says to torque them to. So we got them to 37 foot-pounds, and now we are going to put the starter on, and we're also going to install this pitch stopper back right here. We'll actually go ahead and do that first. Alright, I'm going to leave the rope hook because I can't see the, they call them bumper cushions on this, but I can't see. I call them motor mounts. I can't see the motor mounts, so I'm not sure if they set down into the holes or not. So I'm going to leave the rope attached for now. So if they didn't, I can pick them up, pick this thing up and set it back down in there. I apologize for all that banging around you're probably hearing in the background, but it's windy and my shop doors are flopping everywhere. So if you're wondering what it is, that's what it is. We'll get a pry bar because I'm ready to pry this up. Alright guys, that bolt was a little difficult getting on, but I finally got it in there. Just had to pry things around a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and tighten that. And the torque spec for the pitch-in stopper bolt and nut is 43 foot-pounds. Get this tightened down to 43 foot-pounds. And I know I didn't show y'all before, but if you're going to do work on cars, you definitely want to have one of these bad boys, a torque wrench. You don't have to get a fancy digital one. You can get one of the click type ones for fairly cheap, but this one is super convenient. I know it's backwards so you can't really see it, but this is the up and down arrow that you tell it how many foot-pounds you want to torque it to, and there's some other angle settings, and you can change it to metric conversion or Newton meters, all that stuff. So basically all you have to do is hit calibrate, calibrates it for you, and then you go down to what we want, or up, to 43 foot-pounds. And then when you get the bolt torqued, when it gets to the right torque spec, it'll beep at you. It'll start doing like a beep, 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 and then when it's a solid beep, it's torqued to the right specs. So definitely want to hold the other end of this nut and bolt with a wrench so you know you're getting the right spec. Because if not, all it's going to do is spin around. There we go. Torque the spec. Alright, so now we're going to install the starter bolts. And starter bolts are, so I can't find an exact torque spec for the starter bolts. So the only thing I can think of is to use some common sense and just snug them up. They don't have to be super snug, of course. Just get them decently tight. Alright, so let's get this starter in its place. Alright, so you got the one long starter bolt. Already got it in the hole there. And then there's a stud down here that has a nut on it. Seeing that the transmission bolts get torqued to 37 foot-pounds. I think it was 37. I'll check that one more time. I can't recall. But seeing as it was right around there, we're going to just torque these to the transmission bolt torque spec, since we can't find a spec for the starter bolts, which I think will be just fine. So let me snug these up and then we'll torque them. All right. Now that we got the starter installed, we're going to put the torque converter bolts in next and get them snugged up. So I showed you in the first video how to remove them, but let me flip this around and I'll show you how to install them. So if it's not off already, but if you pull this engine, it should be off. There's a little cover with 4 10mm bolts that covers this bolt up. So after you get that off, I believe this is a 23 or 24mm, I think. I could be wrong, I can't remember that. But you get this is your crankshaft. You want to turn this over until you get one of these bolt holes lined up. And then once you get a bolt hole right here, the first one, you'll kind of get your finger in here and turn this torque converter and get a hole lined up. Then you get that started. So before you tighten any of them, you just want to get it in enough to where you can still turn this over. So get this one in and then turn this engine over with the ratchet and get all 4 bolts in. There's 4, I believe they're 14mm bolts. Could be 12. I think it's 14 though. And get them all in, get them snug, and then go back around and torque them. The torque specs for these is 18 foot-pounds. And it doesn't say anything about putting Loctite or any kind of thread sealant or lock stuff or whatever. But I'm going to put just a dab of some Loctite on it just to ease my mind. It hadn't said it, but I'm going to do it anyway. It can't hurt. So let me get the camera set back up. All right, so this big bolt on the front of the crankshaft is a 22mm. So we already got a hole lined up here. So I'm just going to turn it back just a little bit. And they're 12mm bolts. And like I said, torque spec is 18 foot-pounds. So I'm not sure exactly of the conversion with an extension. So we're just going to go up a couple and put 20. Should be sufficient. And when you go to do this, you're going to want to hold the socket over here, or the ratchet, excuse me. We'll make sure. All right, I got them all torqued. I personally like to go back around and just make sure that by tightening all of them, you didn't loosen up one. So, all right, those bolts are torqued properly. And now we're going to go ahead and put the cover back over that little access point there. In the first video, there was no cover there, but I got one from the junkyard motor that we got. So it's just a little cover to prevent dust from getting down in between the engine and transmission, and also that crank sensor that's right there. So we're just going to pop that in. This little cover's not in the greatest shape, but as long as it's sitting right there, it'll be fine. Ain't gonna hurt nothing. So now that we got all that installed, the next thing we're gonna do is set the vehicle on some jacks. I'm gonna get it all completely jacked up, and we're gonna get the underside done. We're gonna get the exhaust. Sorry, y'all can't see my head while I'm talking. You haven't really been able to see my head the whole time. But figure y'all don't want to look at me. You want to look at the engine. But we're gonna get it set up on jacks and safety stands, and we're going to put the lower bolts in on the transmission. We're going to put that vacuum pump back on. We're going to put the exhaust on. There's 2 ground wires. Then there's a plastic cover. And there might be a couple other things I can't quite remember. But I'm going to get the jacks all set up and get the safety stand set up and get up under here, and I'll show y'all what I'm talking about. All right, guys. So what we're going to do here is get the lower transmission bolts on. There's nuts. There's 2 nuts. And those are probably pretty much all these bolts here. You're just going to have to get them snug because it's just theoretically impossible to try to get any torque specs on this, because you'd have to have a 2-3 foot extension on here to get this on here and get the torque wrench. So just get these really snug. It's 37 foot-pounds, so if you need to go feel what it feels like up top on those bolts up there, then feel free to do that. But you want to get all those transmission bolts back on. I already put all of them on except the nut over here. So we already got those on, and then you got a nut and a bolt right here. And I think there's one more bolt, but I think that goes to the vacuum pump. And then we're going to get the vacuum pump hooked up. There's, I think, 3 or 4 12mm bolts. Let me show you the vacuum pump. Okay, so here's the vacuum pump. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts, and I think one of them could possibly be a transmission bolt. But at any rate, you just set that in there. From the top, I believe it's the easiest way to do it. I think that's how we got it in, or out, I mean. So you want to get that in there. And then you want to put the exhaust back on. I am going to have to go out to the old engine because some of the studs came out apparently when they pulled the exhaust, and they're not in there. So you want to make sure all your studs are in there, and they got nuts. There's, I think, 5 of them, and you want to tighten all that. And then you want to put your ground screws on. I still got to remove the ground screw from the used engine that they just cut off. You want to put these back on both sides. There's one here and one there that's broke off too. And after you get all that on, I can't remember if there's anything else or not. I don't think so. Yeah, I believe that's it. So after you get all that put on, then you can put this plastic cover back on. There's a big plastic cover, and it's got I think 4 or 5 bolts that screw in. So you get those on, and then we're done down here, and we can move to the up top side and get everything put in. One thing I wanted to point out, when I was swapping everything over on the engine, like I said, up top the hoses were dry rotted, so I replaced them, and I also replaced these too. Pardon these massive hose clamps. That's all I had to use, so that's what we went with. Works the same. So, but I replaced this hose, and there's a hose here, and I think that's all the hoses down there. It's for the oil cooler. It's got a little oil cooler next to the filter right here. The coolant runs through, and so I replaced these because they were really dry rotted. This one was completely cracked open, and it just makes it easier just to replace all the rubber when you're in here doing this anyway, if you can. So save you some trouble later down the road. So I am not going to be able to camera or record what I'm doing down here, obviously, kind of like in the removal video, because there's just no good way to have a good angle at this. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to get everything bolted up. And also, I forgot to say one thing. You want to get your engine mounts lined up. This one isn't lined up. I'm going to have to pry it over a little bit. But you also want to get these on. Don't forget these. I forgot to say something about that, but you get these on. Like I said, I'll just have to twist that one around. It's probably just a little bit off. So we'll get those lined up and get all these bolts tightened. And let me show you right quick on for the torque specs for all these bolts. So obviously the transmission bolts are, I'll show you the paperwork. Transmission bolts are 37 foot-pounds, or if you're in another country, the Newton meters or whatever you want to use there. But we're in America, we use American stuff. So 37 foot-pounds for the torque, or the lower transmission bolts, the ones you can torque anyway, if you can get to them. And then the vacuum pump is 18 foot-pounds for those bolts. The nuts for the engine mounts are 55.3 foot-pounds, so 55 or 56, whatever you want to do. And then let's look up the exhaust. One moment, I don't see it on here. I will look up the exhaust nut torque specs for you and get back with you. It's not on the paperwork there. I'll have to get back on the computer, go to all data, and pull all that up. So I'm going to get all that stuff down underneath, and then we will get back up top and we will start plugging it away, getting this thing put back together, and hopefully get her running here for too long. Alright guys, so I got everything done underneath here other than putting the plastic cover on. I'm going to leave that plastic cover off for now because I'm going to have to come back up under here and put this lower hose on when I get the radiator installed. So, but I got the exhaust on. The torque specs for it was 52 foot-pounds. So I got those on, got it all tight. I got all the transmission bolts tightened. And like I said, some of these are virtually impossible to try to torque the spec. So just get them as tight as you can. And, well, not as tight as you can. Get them pretty snug. Don't over-tighten them. And then I got the vacuum pump on. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. Yeah, there it is. And I got the 2 bolts in the bottom and the 2 bolts up top I'll have to get when I get the car set down. So that is everything down here. We are good to go. So let me get this car set down and we will get started on the top end. Guys, so got the car back on the ground, so we're going to start tying up this top end. First thing we'll really do is we'll definitely hook this ground up. This is your main engine ground. You want to put it right there, and then we'll just start plugging in all these connectors. We'll go ahead and put the power steering pump on, which is right there, the alternator, all the V-belts and stuff, and probably wait on the radiator until the very last point. But we'll go ahead and once we get all the connectors that we can see plugged in, we'll put the intake on, and then we'll do the radiator, and we're just about done with this thing. That's about all I can think of. Hook up the fuel lines, all the hoses and stuff. We'll just start piecing this thing back together. Let me get the camera set up and we'll get started. Alright guys, so I'm going to install this ground wire right quick. Couldn't find a torque spec for this, so this is something you just get it snug. You don't want to get it too tight, strip this bolt out, but you want it tight enough to where the bolt doesn't back off, or bolt, excuse me. There's that, and go ahead and bolt this harness bracket back on here. This is just, I think it's 3 10mm or 2 12s into 10. They just screw in right here. And these are some more, you just get them snug, and then it'll be just fine. So far, putting this thing in and taking it out, I mean, it hasn't been hard at any point. Some of the bolts have been kind of tough to get to, but other than that, I mean, it's been pretty straightforward. I'm kind of impressed. I figured something foreign would be difficult to do, but apparently it's not. So. The reason I took that bracket off, y'all may have not seen that in the video, but when I was getting that vacuum pump on, it was just in the way, so that's the reason it was off. So now that we got all that tight, we're going to go ahead and put this alternator and power steering pump on. So I'm going to slide this alternator in here first. And it has a bracket on the other side that has the nut on it. So it just goes, hooks up to the side of this AC compressor. So you can actually even leave the bolt in the hole because it has openings on the AC compressor where it mounts to where you can just leave this sucker on here. So we'll go ahead and do that. Alright, there's that bolt. We're not going to tighten that one just yet because we got to put this one on. And the power steering pump goes on that, so I'm going to move this wire out of the way. Now we're going to reinstall this power steering pump. And there's 2 bolts right here behind the pump, and then there's 2 in the front. There's one kind of down at the bottom, and then of course there's one up here that also bolts to the alternator. So let me grab those right quick. Alright, so the 2 bolts that go to the alternator and also the bolt that goes from the alternator to the power steering pump, those are 12 foot-pounds, and the 14 millimeter bolts, they're 25 foot-pounds. Alright, now the alternator and power steering pump are installed. You can go ahead and plug this in. I don't know if you can see this connector, but it's a little connector plugged into the back of the power steering pump, some type of pressure switch or something. And get this out of the way. Now we can begin to start hooking some of these connectors up, excuse me. And get stuff put back together. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and install our V-belt. We'll install this pulley first. And this pulley is pulley is 25 foot-pounds. This bolt right here is 14 millimeter. And before we put the V-belt on, before I forget, we're going to put this cover back on. It goes on the crankshaft bolt. It's just that little cover. It's got 4 10 millimeter bolts. Just get them on there and snug these bolts up. Not really sure why they put a cover over the crankshaft bolt. I guess maybe so it doesn't get hit, or I'm really not sure. Maybe for decoration. Who knows? There's got to be some purpose. Because if they could do without it, they certainly would. Alright, let me grab the serpentine belt. Alright guys, so I forgot that I had to buy a serpentine belt, so I haven't had a chance to go to the parts store today, so I will get that and we'll put that on in just a minute. But we are going to go ahead and start getting the intake manifold on. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I usually just scrape it with a razor blade so you don't get too much crap down in the valves there. So I'm going to get that cleaned up and get the intake cleaned up. and then we will get this intake put on, and I'll get you the torque specs for it. All right, guys, so I got the intake all cleaned up. Before we set it on, we're going to put these two coolant hoses on their respective pipes. I just feel like it'd be easier to tighten the hose clamps on this side. That way we don't have to fight it once it gets on there. We just have to fight the ones on the throttle body. This is for the throttle body cooler. So we're going to go ahead and just slide those on. I kind of got that a little too tight. Good thing to do. I've had this, it's under a covered shop, but I always like to do it just to be sure. You want to look down if you didn't cover your valves. You want to look down in there and make sure you didn't drop any nuts or bolts or anything like that. Because you'd hate to get all this put together and start it and destroy one of your valves and completely kill this engine. When you're good, like I figured we would be. So now we're going to set the intake in. I changed the gaskets out. They're just rubber gaskets. There's 6 of them in a pack. They're not that expensive, like $20-30 or something. And then you got your 2 fuel lines, one on this end and one on that end right here. And there's your throttle body on the back. And those cooling lines, that smaller one hooks up to this one, and the longer one hooks up to that one. Then you got a vacuum line here. Then you got your brake booster vacuum connection. And then there's a couple connectors that come up and connect right here, and then there's one big connector that hooks up to your throttle body. So that is basically about it. There's one more connector on the front here once you get it in. So we are going to set this thing down in here. Alright, so got my glove changed. We're going to put these intake bolts in. Remember to get them all started before you go tightening them all down. Make sure it all lines up. Alright guys, and the torque specs for these intake bolts are 18 foot-pounds. So with my extension, I'm just going to go to 20 to be safe. And I know some of y'all just may not see the point of torque specs. And some of y'all may not want to buy a torque wrench because you're just trying to change this in your backyard or something. But it's very important, especially on stuff like this with the plastic intake or valve cover gaskets or stuff that's very important on your engine. You know, brackets, some brackets you can get away with, and some other stuff like that. But if you, like these bolts, if you over tighten them, you're either going to squish the rubber seal too much and it's going to leak, or you're going to crack this plastic intake, and then you're going to have to buy one or get one from a junkyard or something. And if you ever, same thing with valve cover gaskets or anything else, oil pan, this front cover, anything you have to change. If you over torque it, it's going to break something or leak. And if you under torque it, it's going to leak and just cause you nightmares. So it's just a safer bet if you're going to be doing this in your car. I don't know if Maybe the parts stores might rent torque wrenches. I don't think they do, but if you know somebody at a parts store, maybe they'll let you loan one, or if you got a buddy that's got one. Like I said, you don't have to get the fancy one like I have. You can just get a click type torque wrench. It works just as well. It's a little more work involved, but it works good. And I think you can get one for like probably 40 or 50 bucks at the parts store, maybe a little bit more. I'm not sure. But anyway, those bolts are torqued. So now we're gonna put these fuel lines on before we put these plastic covers on. And like I thought, this vacuum line's gonna just be in our way, so we're gonna stick that out of the way for now. I bought some new fuel line. If there's anything you definitely want to be good, not leak, it's your fuel lines. So I went ahead and got some new fuel lines. So I got a little bit extra on here. I didn't know how much I was going to need, so I just put some excess on here. You can always take more away. So, alright. Got this side on. You definitely want to make sure, before you tighten these clamps down, make sure there's no kinks in the fuel line when you get it installed from making it either like too long or whatever. So just check that before you tighten everything down. Alright guys, got the fuel lines hooked up. We're going to put this vacuum line back on, and it's got it had a hose clamp on it. I'm just going to reuse one of the squeeze type clamps because this is just a vacuum seal. It's not really going to have to be super tight. It's a pretty snug fit anyway. There's that. And now we're going to bring these fuel lines around. This fuel line, it should be just like any other fuel line. It was kind of funky getting it out, but it should just snap right back in there. Yep. You just want to make sure you hear it click. And then this return fuel line, I completely forgot about it, but it's brought it out pretty good. We're going to try to snip off the excess of this. I'm going to try to reuse it because this is kind of a funky looking hose on the other end. And this return line shouldn't have a whole lot of pressure on it anyway, so we'll probably be alright just reusing it. Yeah, it feels alright. Let me grab a hose clamp. With these really small hose clamps, this is the smallest one that I keep around. Once you get it tight with the ratchet, I like to just tighten it with a flathead. That way you don't break it down. So there's that. Our next step now is going to be to put these side covers on. They just go on, and there's 4 bolts that hold it. And the torque specs for these are 14 foot-pounds. So slide these on here. Get these bolts off right here. Alright, so we got all those covers on. Fuel line's connected. Vacuum hose is connected. Except for this one, I'm pretty sure it's on like the air cleaner or something. So now we're going to run these AC lines. And, get all that hooked up. Alright, so our next step is going to be to put this radiator in and condenser. So I am going to get everything set up, and we're going to get the radiator condenser put in and put some brackets on and a few more things, and we're going to be ready to fire this thing up. I'll be right back. Alright guys, one quick thing before we put the radiator on. You want to get that AC line on that's low. I figured out how it goes. You just get the AC line in the hole. Make sure the seal's all the way seated. And then tighten it. This bolt's going to be a little tricky with this intake on. But I mean, there's really no way you could have got around it with the intake off. So. Alright guys, so ran to the store and grabbed a serpentine belt. And before we do that, we're going to put this little bracket on. It goes back here and it helps to hold the little plastic cover that goes over the top of this. So we're just going to get that on, and we're actually going to go ahead and put the air intake on back there. You just want to make sure and tighten this hose clamp here for the throttle body so you don't have any leaks right there. That is done. So now let's get this serpentine belt on. Typically there's a routing diagram somewhere, but I don't see one on this car. So we're just going to try to figure it out on our own. You pretty much can't go wrong. If you don't hook it up right, it won't either get tight or whatever. So it's definitely not that way. Alright guys, so there's the belt. That's what it looks like when it's lined up. Just in case y'all can't find a diagram or anything online. That is what it goes around those pulleys there. And that's the configuration for it. Alright, so now that that belt's hooked up, we're going to hook this hose. It goes, it's a vacuum hose or PCV hose or whatever. It goes here and then hooks to that air intake that we just installed. Might actually go the other way. Goes over there. Alright, now let me grab the radiator. We're going to set that radiator in. Get that off of there for now. Here's the radiator assembly. I'm not sure if you can really see it that well. We're going to set it in. This one, the rubber mounts should be in the hole. Make sure you get your rubber mounts on the bottom. And I'm going to set this thing down in here. Move some things around. Down towards the bottom here. I think there's a sensor at the bottom. I can't see it yet. So now that we got that in here, we're going to go ahead and hook all the hoses up. Let me show you everything we're going to do. So we're going to hook up this, there's a bracket that goes here. We got some transmission cooler hoses to hook up right there. Then we got an AC condenser line to hook up right there. And then we got your two coolant hoses that go to the top. One here and one there. And then we got the lower coolant hose down there. It goes to the bottom of the engine. And then there's a, this is just a drain plug. So we're good there. And then once we get all that hooked up, we'll slide the fan down in there. And we'll be just about done. Alright guys, so let's start hooking all this stuff up. All these cooler lines and everything. Alright, so the shorter radiator hose obviously goes over here, but it goes to the bottom outlet pipe off the radiator. So then the longer one goes right here. It goes on the top outlet, and then it goes to the other outlet pipe on the engine. So let me grab my Alright. Now that the coolant hose is installed, we can go ahead and start putting our radiator mount bracket back on. I guess that's what you call this thing. So we'll get these, there's 2 bolts, or on this side there's 3 bolts, 2 bolts on that side. Oh no, there's 3 bolts on this side too. One's for that radiator cap hose thing. So this just sets down in here. Actually goes, I believe the hose goes behind it, yeah. I'm going to show y'all too the radiator mounts. They go right here where one of the bolt holes were. That was on the mount. Once you get all those other bolts tight, holds the radiator in there so it doesn't wobble around and crack. So just get those nice and snug too. Alright guys, so now we're going to install the air filter. The last piece of it anyway. And I purchased an air filter. The one that was in here was completely filthy. So it just goes in. I believe it goes in like, it goes in like that. So it's just got some pieces here and here that slide down, and then it's got the 2 snaps. And don't forget to plug your mass airflow sensor in, or this thing will run like absolute dog turd. Alright, like this. Just pumps into this air box. And then it's got some of them push type connectors to go on it. I think we're going to wait because I think the cover that goes right here is going to get in our way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the car back up in the air so we can take a look at the underside, what we got to do with that lower coolant hose. Then we're going to come back up here, hook the battery up, put some oil in this thing, and some coolant, and see what happens. I'll be right back. Alright guys, so here's the coolant hose we're going to hook up right there with the clamps. It's pretty straightforward, really nothing to that. And then there is 2 bolts that go down here and support that rest of that radiator mount. So you want to get those in. And if I'm not mistaken, that is everything down here, other than the cover, of course. And I'm probably actually going to leave that off until I get this thing completely running. Make sure there's no leaks or anything like that. So I'm going to get this coolant hose hooked up. And then we'll go back topside and hook this battery up and see if she runs. Alright guys, so I got the all the stuff underneath done. Except for the plastic cover, like I said. So now we're going to go ahead and put this this plastic cover on top here because we shouldn't need to see anything right there. And it's just got these little push clips. You put them in the holes. Some of them are a little rotted. That one right there is just completely shot. I may have to get a couple more. Now we're going to install the battery. And I had to get a new battery for this thing as well because the old one was dead as a doorknob. Most batteries only last between 3 and 5 years, so it's nothing unexpected. So the battery's pretty straightforward. Except I'm missing a bolt. I can't remember if I was missing that or not. But this hooks to some hooks down on the battery tray. There's a little pan at the bottom for the battery. It just sets in there. And you put the battery in there, and then you put this over it and tighten down. I'm going to have to find this bolt though. So I'm going to get that put in, and then we'll put some coolant in this. Alright guys, battery's hooked up. Now we're going to fill this thing up with coolant. See what happens here. This is my coolant bleeding funnel. It's phenomenal. It comes with a bunch of different pieces. I'm going to have to clean it out a little bit. So you just find the right piece. Looks like this is the part that screws on to here. And then you just find the right fitting. I believe it looks like. Not quite that one. Well, it's not right quick. That one right there. You can get one of these at the parts store. I mean, it's not necessary, but I like to have it. Makes the filling up and bleeding process a lot easier. So you just put that on, and then you put the cap on there. Or put the funnel on there. I don't like how loose. There we go. That's a little bit better. So I'm going to fill this up, and then I'm going to show y'all some, there's 2 bleeder screws. And now that I just thought about it, we're going to have to pop this back off again, this plastic cover. So, but there's 2 bleeding screws. I'll show y'all where they're at and how to do this once we get this filled up. I'm going to get this filled up right quick. Alright guys, so I got the engine and radiator filled up. No leaks that I can see yet. I'm just topping off the coolant overflow reservoir. Alright, that's good. So, actually, let me flip this camera around and I'll show you these bleeder screws. Alright, so the first bleeder screw is going to be a little bit tricky to get to. We may even end up having to pull this back off. I didn't look at this before we finished up, but I don't know if you can see it or not. Let's see if I can get the camera a little bit better there. Right, if you see the heater hoses, it's going to be almost impossible to show you. But there's a little plug coming out of one of the heater hoses. And it looks like it's just a Phillips head. So you crack that open and you let it bleed out until coolant starts coming out of there. And if it gets low, obviously keep it filled. And then once you get that one, once coolant starts coming out of that one, you close that off. And then you come over here. And this one is a... I don't know if I'm going to be able to let y'all see it or not. Yeah. This one is like a 3/8 ratchet fitting. So you crack that one open and you bleed the air out of the radiator. And then once coolant starts coming out of this, then you close it and you top everything off. And then you put the radiator cap on. And then once we get to the point of starting this thing up, I will give you the rest of the procedure. It's not a hard procedure. There's a lot to it. You gotta rev the engine up and race it to like 3,000 RPMs for a few minutes, and then shut it off and check it, and then race it again. Just basically trying to flush all the air out of the system. So now what we're gonna do, since I'm gonna crack these lines open and bleed them out. I'm not gonna be able to video while I'm doing that because it's just. I mean, I guess I can leave the video on, but so now what we're gonna do is now what I'm gonna do, I'll set the camera back up. Y'all won't be able to see a whole lot, but I'm gonna attempt to crack open that bleeder screw back there first, obviously, because that's what you want to do. And I may have to take that intake off. I'm not sure, or the breather off. But I'm gonna crack those lines loose and get it bled as much as you can without starting it. Then we're gonna put some oil in this thing, and we're gonna start this thing up. All right, guys, here we go. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so I'm able to get to it pretty easy. There's air coming out right now. And now there's coolant, pretty much all coolant. I let a little bit coolant come out because I could still feel some air bubbles. Tighten this, you don't want to over tighten this because it's probably brittle. All right, so there's that. I still got some coolant in there. So now we're gonna crack open the other bleeder screw. And I was right, it's just a 3/8 plug. We're good there. No air bubbles. All right, so that's done. So now let me grab some oil and put that in. All right, so I'm going to put some oil in this thing, and I'm just going to go over it real good and make sure I didn't forget anything. I think we're good though, and we are going to start this up, and I'll show y'all what I was talking about with that bleeding procedure. I'm not super comfortable with revving an engine up just as soon as we started it, and we don't even know what kind of condition this engine is in, but we'll do it anyway so we can bleed the coolant out, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully this thing runs good. All right, I'll be back. Also, guys, I said I was putting oil in it. I just wanted to let y'all know the capacity for this engine is 5.8 quarts. So you may want to check your owner's manual when you're putting oil in it, but if it's the same model, it should be about the same weight, so 5.8 quarts. And to those who might ask me why I didn't use SuBARU specified coolant or whatever it's called, I am not spending that much money on coolant, and I've never, as long as you drain the whole system and refill it with the universal green stuff, I've never had any issues with it, so that's the reason I'm going to go with it. So if you want to get SuBARU coolant and spend an ungodly amount of money, then go for it, but I'm not doing that, so there's that. All right, everybody, so I got everything done. Now what we're going to do is turn the key on. We're not going to start it just yet. Let me grab the key, actually. What we're going to do first is we're going to turn the key on 2 or 3 times and prime up the fuel pump and the injectors and all the lines and stuff, and then we're going to check it for leaks. You always want to do that before you start something if you've messed with any of the fuel systems. That way you can make sure there's no fuel leaks before you decide to go starting it. So we're just going to prime it up. And most fuel pumps will only stay on about 2 or 3 seconds when you turn the key off and on. So I'm just going to do this, like I said, 2 or 3 times. Then we're just going to come around here and check for leaks, like I said. Make sure there's no fuel squirting out anywhere. Shouldn't be, because it's all new hoses and stuff. And the good thing about fuel is you can smell it almost instantly. Whenever it starts leaking, it's got a real powerful smell. And I think we are good. I don't see no fuel anywhere. So, yeah, I think we're good. So, I've already checked all the fluids. So, we are going to start this thing up. And I'm obviously not too worried about it with this car because we haven't done anything sketchy or anything. But, you know, it's always a good idea just to be safe because anything can happen. Have you a fire extinguisher on hand, or you can get a can of this stuff here too. It works really good. It's like a spray fire extinguisher, a little bit smaller than an aerosol can. Puts them out real fast. Just to be safe. I don't expect anything like that to happen, but you never know. So, better safe than sorry. Let's see what happens. There we go. It's running a little rough at first, which is going to be expected. It probably hasn't ran in a good while. So right now is a good time to make sure you got nothing leaking. You can expect a little bit of smoke. You're just going to have to burn off all the fluids that either got on the exhaust or just dripped down from when you were like filling up the coolant or whatever. So it's running now. I'm gonna let it run a little bit longer, and then I'll come back and I'm gonna show you how to do that coolant bleed procedure that I was talking about. So I'll be right back. All right, guys. So now that I at least have the engine running for a minute anyway, I didn't feel comfortable doing that coolant bleed procedure until I knew the oil was running through the engine and whatever. So basically, after you've done all the bleeding stuff that I talked about in the other section, once you crack those 2 bleeder screws open and get all the air out there, so you start the car up and you rev it up to 3,000 RPMs about 5 or 6 times is what it says. And you want to make sure and do that within 40 seconds according to this. And then you shut the engine off, and then you wait for a minute, then you open the radiator cap, and if the coolant drops, you want to obviously fill it back up to the filler neck, and then you want to perform that same procedure again. So after we do that, and then it said after you do that and wait a minute each time, then you start the engine and operate the heater at max, which is normally what you do. And then you want to run the engine at 2,000 RPMs until the fan starts coming on and off. So let's get to that step first, and then we'll carry on. So I'm going to start it up. And then I'm going to do that about 5 or 6 times. It's hard to get it to 3,000, but I'm getting it to 4, but there's 5. And then I'm going to stop the engine. And we're going to wait about a minute. We're going to check this radiator cap, and be real careful, guys, when you open up a radiator cap. I mean, it's already feeling kind of warm, but sometimes there'll be a lot of pressure right here, so I like to take a rag and open it whenever we do. And I just read the instructions some more, and it says you can run the engine at 2,000 RPM or less. So I'm assuming that means you can leave it at idle. So I'm going to leave mine at idle while it warms up. So just wanted to throw that in there. All right, guys, so it's probably hard to see on the camera, but the fans are coming on and off now, which is basically the engine's fully warmed up. So I'm going to back this out of the way, because while I'm letting this cool off, I am going to clean my shop up a little bit. I don't want to get dirt all over this car. So we back it up right here. And the next step on the instructions is to cool this thing off. It says until it is 86 degrees. I mean, I basically just let it cool off completely. If you have an infrared thermometer, you can measure that, or if you got a scanner, you can look it up on the computer or whatever. But you want to let it cool off completely, and then open the radiator cap. And let's see. Sorry, I'm just reading these. You open the radiator cap and fill it up if it dropped, and then set the heater setting to the max position. This is after it's cooled off. You fill the radiator up, set it to the max position on heat, and perform the step that you did first, where you raced it to 3,000 RPMs. At less than, it says perform it at less than 3,000 RPMs. So just kind of race the engine, not too hard, but just, 2,000-3,000, somewhere around there. And if you hear any kind of flowing sounds, kind of like water running through your heater core or whatever, then it says to perform the step where you run it until it's hot and then cool it off again and see what happens. So basically just let this cool off. I'm going to shut it off, let it cool off. And then we'll check the coolant level, and we'll race the engine a little bit, get the bubbles. I'm pretty positive we got all the bubbles out. So you just want to make sure and watch your temperature gauge and make sure it doesn't overheat. So while we're doing this, I'm gonna, like I said, clean my shop. I'm gonna let this cool off. It'll take probably an hour or so to cool off, and then we'll be back and we'll be ready for a test drive. All right, guys. So I got the let it cool off. Got the coolant checked. I had to add like not even a pint of coolant. So I also checked my transmission fluid before I left, because you always lose about a quart when you pull that radiator out. I lost somewhere right near it, so I had to add some. You want to put some global transmission fluid in this, or you can go get specialty SuBARU stuff. But we're going to take this thing up for a drive here, see what she does. As far as I know, the transmission was fine before we pulled the engine, so I don't think we'll have any problems there. Just want to make sure the engine runs good, doesn't have any misfires or anything like that. So let me get off this bumpy road here, and we'll see what happens. So far, it feels phenomenal. The transmission seems to be shifting perfectly. It is absolutely running great. I'm actually going to have to turn this heat off because I'm roasting. I live in South Carolina, and the weather is the most bipolar weather you'll ever experience in your life. So it doesn't know when it needs to be hot or when it needs to be cold. So you can never get comfortable. Brake pedal makes a little squeaking noise. I might have to address that at some point, but everything seems great. This is a phenomenal riding vehicle. Of course, I'm going to test drive it a lot longer. Obviously, I want to make sure nothing leaks, nothing starts happening after a while, and get it ready before we send it out of here. And also, I'll have to I'm going to put that bottom cover on, that little plastic cover that I haven't put on yet. And I'm going to charge the AC. I never like to charge the AC system until I know for sure it's running great. So I think I'm pretty confident that I can charge the AC system now. And obviously this thing's going to need a bath on the outside because it went through pollen season here. So, but other than that, man, I think this thing is perfect. It's running phenomenally. Well, thank you guys for watching my video. Please like it and subscribe to my page and hit that notification button, because I got a lot of videos coming out soon. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope I was informative. If you got any questions or concerns or comments or anything like that, just leave them below there in the comment section right there. And I'll try to get back to them as much as I can. I appreciate y'all, and I hope y'all stay safe out there. This world's crazy, but God's got it all under control, so we'll be good to go in the end. So everybody stay safe and have a blessed day.